Yeah, good.
Okay, here we go.
All right.
Welcome to a special edition of Radio Her brought to you by the Women in Business Association Scarborough. In this 5-part series hosted by Elina, Chow, and Matthew Fuller, we explore entrepreneurship in the perspective of failure and how we can redefine, overcome, and accept an inevitable part of our life.
So, Elina, when we think about the word failure, what do you think typically comes to mind?
It's over.
Yeah.
Pack your bags and go.
Yeah, there is something that's very resolute and stagnant about it.
Yeah, there's it's over. It's finished. Everyone needs, I think we've been trained as children, right? When you fail, you've got that F, there's no other way. You can't come back anymore. There's no going back to it. That's what I think of, certainly growing up, when I think of failure.
Yeah, and the F on the page, it's a judgment.
Yeah,
there's something, it feels so personal about what it means to fail.
Yeah, so when we talk about failure, I think of it more of a spectrum of lessons. There's a scale to it. It's not just it's the ultimate, failure. It's not that it's over. It's there's so many parts of entrepreneurship that involves testing and retesting and going back to the market to see if your solution is addressing a certain challenge, that you can't get it right the first time. And if you do, you'd be a billionaire. Right?
Yeah. So that's why we're here, this redefining what failure is. So you talked about a spectrum. What else, would you put to, when we compare it to what we think people typically think about failure, what does that redefinition mean to you?
I think it's just looking at it not in some definitive way. There's a lot of gray within failure, isn't there? And so many things that we can do when something is not working do we look at it from a different angle? Do we re-strategize and try to apply it to different people? And do we think about collaborating or adding new features or taking away something to make it work? So before we judge something as ultimately failing, what can we do? And then if all else fails, then making that tough decision and saying, okay, maybe it is time to call it, and then starting to look at some options.
Yeah, I always say to my clients, mine the failure, or mind the pain for the learning. So you talked about pivoting or making some tweaks based off something that might feel like a failure, to collect more data, because there is something that feels, as I said earlier, so emotional about failure. But when you bring your attention to the data, what's on the spreadsheet, what are people telling me, what's the feedback I'm getting, it makes it feel separate somehow. It makes it feel like this thing I can tackle, as opposed to it being an internalized judgment of my character, my ability, my capability to succeed more generally. Because it's if this fails, then I'll always be a failure.
Yeah. I wish I had you as a coach for all these years. Right? But that's something that we often feel as well as entrepreneurs, is we're always alone. Even if we have a team, sometimes when you're the decision maker, we need someone else to be there, don't they? Do you get that from your clients? Is that they always feel like they failed, not because the product isn't working, but they are just they're not working.
Yeah, there's something that I see all the time, and not just with entrepreneurs, but there is this wanting to label. It's almost this impatience with wanting to, even if I'm not happy with it, I need to know it, I need to control it, I need to be above it, which creates this labeling. And as we're going to talk about in other episodes, there's so many things that go into entrepreneurships, whether it's the relationships with people, the markets that we're in, or the timing of things that will influence the project, but have nothing to do with us. And so when we over personalize it and our ego gets attached into it, then we do ourselves and the product that we're trying to build a disservice, because we're making it mean something that it doesn't mean.
Yeah, and as entrepreneurs, we tend to have a pretty healthy ego, and we almost need it in order to commit to something or an idea or a concept and try to make it work. We need to believe in ourselves and what we have. So that commitment to succeed, often when you're not there yet, feels like a failure as well, right? So when we want to talk about in this podcast to redefine it is making sure we have that awareness to differentiate between the different types of something not working.
Yeah.
And then deciding, okay, is it time to pack up and leave? Or is this just a lesson that we need to take in and change?
Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. And what I talk to clients about all the time is the other side of the coin. So when you talked about the ego and how that serves us in some way, well, how is that going to detract? And what do I need to know? What do I need to keep in mind about how this strength sometimes is a weakness and vice versa? How are my weaknesses going to serve me in other ways? So there is this stepping out, and hopefully that's, we're going to do that through this series. It's that stepping back and looking at things in a more full picture to be able to have the conversation around failure, what that means, and how do we keep it forward moving.
Awesome.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Radio Her, and stay tuned for a final event hosted on March 6th for an in-person fireside chat to talk about entrepreneurship with these two amazing hosts. Make sure to follow Wiba's Instagram and check out the link in our bio to register for this insightful event during Entrepreneurship Week. I'll catch you next week on this podcast. Until then, I hope you have an amazing week ahead.